1985 Harmony Gold, the debut of Robotech.
I'm getting no response at all from the fan channel. Somehow we seem to...
Robotech has been huge as a franchise throughout the history since it debuted. For all of the details on the history of that licensing and the way that all three of these series were put together as different seasons of a series and all of that, I recommend Toy Galaxy, which is a great channel in and of itself, but they've done several videos delving into great detail on the history of Robotech and piecing it together. Full disclosure, I did not watch Robotech when I was a child in the 80s. I don't know exactly what it was that it conflicted with. I know that era was G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats for a while, He-Man for a while. I do remember hearing about Robotech from classmates at school. I remember looking at a little bit of it and finding the Japanese style animation was quite different, and especially the human figures, and I just couldn't seem to decide. I didn't really care for it at the time and did not watch Robotech. So about 3 years ago, I decided I would stream it and I would binge it and I would watch all 3 seasons. So here's my quick review, having just re-binged season 1. Robotech is clearly put together from different series. As you listen to the dialogue, the way that it's been modified for Western consumption, the way that the story comes together, it does not quite come together. Proto-culture, which is very clearly by the end of season 1, something to do with primitive culture, with culture considered by the aliens to be more primitive, and the thing involving human relationships and sexuality and mating and all of that being quite strange to them. Later on, proto-culture seems to be something that drives the technology. It's something that drives perhaps something like dilithium, and it's not entirely clear until the 3rd season. It's completely foreign in every practical sense, except for some transforming equipment. It really does not even feel like the same show. I really like season 1, that being said. Season 1, watching it as an adult and seeing how it developed, I have to say, I hate Lin Min May. I thought Lin Min May was the most annoying, childish possible character to put into a story. And then her cousin Lin Kyle appeared, who is sort of meant to give it some ideological balance, I guess, because of his anti-war stance. But it is so childishly, naively anti-war with nothing supporting it, no background, no discussion. Just he don't like the military even when you're defending yourself from alien invasion. So he was actually worse than Min May. But I tell you, Lin Min May, what an annoying whole relationship between her and Rick Hunter, and it's just wow. Then again, they're quite young. I mean, she turned sweet 16 in the story, and so maybe it's my watching it as an adult that makes her seem even extra annoying. I can't be sure. But that was really the interesting thing with Robotech season 1, in my view, was that it spoke to a generation that was beginning to grow up. And I've said this about comic books and other stories of, in that era, they were becoming geared towards older kids than finally adults. And that was the era in which I was growing up. And so there's a generation of us that sort of grew up with this stuff. In Robotech, you can really see it's kind of unbalanced. There's these childish moments with Lin Min May, with her cousin Lin Kyle. There's these very, very childish tantrums being thrown. And yet there's also this very profound science fiction story that is deeply tragic. And really watching it as an adult and being like, we watched this as kids, or some of us watched this as kids, finding the alien technology, not knowing quite how to use it, being attacked by the aliens when you turned on the engine, the disaster of accidentally space folding people out past Pluto, people freezing to death in the instant icy, sub-icy cold, people moving into the ship for refuge, and then the ship transforms and the city's destroyed again, being introduced to pilots and characters that you're like, okay, gotta remember them, this is a new character, and they're dead 5 minutes later. There's a really tragic sort of realism involved in the story at the same time that the people are very immature. But we do get really deep insights. There's the little brief things at the end of almost every episode where our narrator says something that puts it in context. We get Rick Hunter, young man that he is, a boy practically, pondering that he's just been through combat and how all their lives are different now since the alien attack, and all of these sorts of tragedies becoming more real. So it's a fascinating way that the story comes together with this mixture of childishness and maturity. In fact, when you binge it all at once, I had a couple of nightmares about being trapped in a transforming ship. I mean, I got to tell you that if you're really paying attention to that story and you're taking it to heart as an adult, you're like, wow, this is a very tragic story. And the things these people are going through are very tragic and very much combat the feeling of being in combat and seeing people, characters that some you cared about, some you just met and were getting prepared to care about, but they're just gone because that's the reality of war. Watching it as an adult and comparing Robotech to the stuff that's out now, science fiction wise or anime wise, and full disclosure, I've never really gotten into all of the anime that's out there, so I can't draw that comparison. But the things going on in our contemporary culture, growing up on Star Trek reruns and then new Trek movies around the time that these cartoons were becoming a part of my life also, what's really fascinating in Robotech is the way they imagined the distant future of 99 and 2000 and beyond, that there is how they dealt with issues of equality and representation in a time when they weren't necessarily buzzwords. They were becoming that. Star Trek had gone out of its way starting in the 60s to have a diverse cast, but they were doing it in a way that they weren't lecturing people about diversity. They just happened to have them. The really interesting thing with Robotech is something that's sort of geared at kids and sort of geared at teenagers growing into adulthood, that this bridge between immaturity and maturity. One of the things that really stood out to me is the majority of the command crew around Captain Glovel, they are all female. Like everyone on the bridge but Captain Glovel are female. And they're at different stages of life. And even though we don't get a lot of in-depth discussion about most of them, we see Lisa, we see Claudia, their relationships with people are often sort of stereotypical, if that's the right word. I hate using contemporary buzzwords, but they behave on the bridge in sort of giggly, girly ways sometimes, which strikes as odd coming from the place we are now, watching it and experiencing it. But yet, everything about that is handled differently than it would be today. It isn't presented as a negative or meant for us to view it as a negative, and they turn right around, and the commander with Lisa, with Claudia, they turn right around and they do very impressive things as very capable and competent officers. And I think it speaks to more of what was going on then as opposed to now, the growth of these various waves of feminism, and I won't pretend to know all of the terminology. The idea of equality as sameness is a thing that I see really plaguing our society, that unless you dress the same, act the same, do exactly the same job in the same way, that everything about us must be the same in order to be equal, when in fact every human being is different regardless of gender, regardless of race. But every single individual is different and has different strengths, different weaknesses, different capabilities. That's just how things are. And yet the promotion of the culture is sort of this homogeneity of sameness. Whereas with Robotech in particular, watching that from 85, season 1, they didn't hesitate. And again, many of the characters are very young in the story, which helps your viewers familiarize with them, the age group you're targeting. But they did this incredible job of having them at the same time do these things that are very childish and then turn around and be very capable. Having all of those women on the bridge around Captain Glovel, and he's a little bit of a stuffy figure, very much the captain, respectable officer, but yet they can go from having giggles about boys, men, giggles about relationships and joking around, to turning around and leading missions into the alien ship to spy and to get technology or to get intelligence, directing fighters into combat, being able to be on the front line with a fighter. It's sort of an incredible expression of people can be who they are, whatever that is, and still do this thing. And you don't have to fit this pretended mold of now, if you're going to be on the bridge, you're going to all behave like Captain Glovel even though you're women. Or we're going to make him and you all act the same in some in-between phase. But rather, they're not ashamed at all to have them do things that you're like, that's quite silly. They're joking around, and it's like, are they, at first you're like, are they making them look bad? And like, no, that's not intended at all. That would be how it would be presented today. But in fact, they're just having fun. They're just behaving in this way that is sort of culturally what girls do, even though these are women at various phases of life on the bridge. And yet they do still get presented as capable, competent, intelligent officers in which you could trust your life in a combat situation. I think that's the thing that stuck out to me the most with Robotech, is that difference, and this is the era that it comes from, but it is at the same time, it's incredibly enlightened. I don't know, that's a loaded thing to say. It's incredibly progressive, which is another loaded thing to say. But it is definitely science fiction projecting certain ideals into the future, the way that Star Trek was, Star Wars to some degree, and other things. Robotech is doing that, but at the same time, it is not buying into the thing that becomes sort of accepted wholesale by the culture later. And so they feel no shame in having these people be young, be childish, be boys obsessed with girls, even if they're like Lin Min May and they're obnoxious, and she wants to be a singing star, and yet he's also a fighter pilot that puts his life on the line, gets terribly wounded in this bloody war with a command crew on the bridge of mostly women who can be goofy and silly and joke around and laugh about men and then turn around and lead these combat missions. It really is, I think, the most impressive thing about Robotech, especially that season 1 story arc, is the way they're able to present this. And as I said, it's almost paleo Star Trek, like the original Star Trek series, which had all of this sort of diversity in the cast, but didn't talk about it. It was just there, and you learned to love those people for who they were, not this thing that they represented or this mold that they fit. So I really enjoyed it, Robotech. It's worth binging again. I was able to find it basically free on YouTube, but not always the clearest. They did remaster it. There's an HD out there, but I can't seem to find any streaming service where you can rent it or buy it. You can buy individual episode by episode through Amazon, but they're not the HD remaster. And you can watch them for free on YouTube, but some of them are not as clear or complete as they could be. And I'm sure that goes back to the whole licensing issue with Harmony Gold and all of that, but you can apparently buy the Blu-ray, you can buy the disc if you've got a device that plays those things, and we can just keep hoping and praying that at some point that HD becomes available through streaming. I know there's a big push to keep redoing it. There were other sequels out there that I have not watched, but again, I hesitate for any reboots. I think the last reboot I liked was Battlestar Galactica. That was excellently done, but it was early enough, being about like 15 years ago now, that it did a fabulous job on reimagining the story. Nowadays, they can't even make He-Man, and it's ridiculous that the insertion again of all modern preconceptions into this stuff. So I know there's a movement of fans out there that would like to see more Robotech. I'm sort of hesitant about ever seeing any new version of any of this stuff, but rather to enjoy it for what it was, when it was, because I just don't know who I would trust to make any more of it. I'll leave that to my imagination and imagine it myself. Excuse me. Anyway, Robotech. Watch it, love it, enjoy it, live long and prosper. We'll see you next time.
Do you really think they're just playing with us, Captain?
Yes. They have the advantage, but they don't attack. They must have a reason.